While other toddlers played with chocolate, Peter Connolly wore it like a mask. His mother smeared it across his face to hide the bruises. Just minutes before social workers arrived to check if he was safe. On August 3rd, 2007, that one-year-old boy took his final breath. Not in an accident, not by strangers, but in his own home, tortured to death by his mother, her boyfriend, and his brother. This is how the system watched him die. 17 months old. That's how long Peter Connolly lived. 17 months of laughter. First steps, and lullabies, or at least, that's what should have been. Instead, his short life ended on August 3rd, 2007, in a blood-stained cot, surrounded by the very people who should have protected him. His mother, her boyfriend, and his brother. Today, we unravel how a little boy known only as Baby P became a symbol of systemic failure. Look at his photos. Curly hair, bright eyes. That's Peter Connolly at just a few months old, born March 1st, 2006, in Tottenham, North London. To neighbors, health visitors, even passing strangers, he seemed like any other baby. Curious, smiling, clinging to his mother's hand. But that image was a mirage, because behind closed doors, Peter's life wasn't just unstable. It was already cracking under the weight of a truth social services knew cold. His mother, Tracy Connolly, couldn't be trusted with a child. She'd lost custody of her two older kids just years before. Authorities documented her neglect, her chaos, her inability to parent. Yet when Peter was born, the system gave her another chance. Case files called it rehabilitation. Support workers hoped she'd changed, but Tracy didn't change. She unraveled, and into that vacuum stepped two men, her new boyfriend, Stephen Barker, a violent ex-con with a history of abusing women, and his brother, Jason Owen. Suddenly, Peter wasn't just Tracy's son. He was a toddler trapped in a house with three adults, none of whom saw him as a child, only as a burden, a punchline, or worse. It began quietly, a bruise on the arm, a scrape on the knee, things any active toddler might get. Tracy Connolly would explain them away. Peter was clumsy. He fell. He bumped into things. For a while, people believed her. But by early 2007, just a year after his birth, the marks on Peter's tiny body told a different, horrifying story. They weren't accidents anymore. They were a map of torture, drawn by the very hands meant to keep him safe, his mother Tracy, her boyfriend Stephen Barker, and Stephen's brother, Jason Owen. The descent was steep and brutal. The occasional bruise became constant. The minor scrapes turned into deep, ugly wounds. Peter was seen by doctors. He was visited by social workers. Health visitors checked on him. Police officers were even called to the house. Over 60 times. 60 times professionals had contact with Peter or his family in the 8 months leading to his death. 60 chances to see the truth. 60 chances to save him. And 60 times, they walked away. Look at the record. Broken ribs. Not once, but multiple times. How does a 1-year-old break his ribs falling? Blackened fingernails ripped off, likely in pain or punishment. Bite marks. Human bite marks. Pressed into his soft skin. A deep cut on his head. A torn earlobe. Bruises covering his back. His chest. His legs. His face. His face. Each injury was a scream Peter couldn't voice. Each one was dismissed. He's accident-prone. They said, he's a bit rough and tumble. Tracy seems stressed, but she's coping. The explanations were flimsy, paper-thin, but they were accepted, over and over. The truth behind closed doors was a nightmare. Tracy, Stephen, and Jason weren't stressed parents. They were tormentors. Peter wasn't clumsy. He was their punching bag, their stress relief, their plaything. If he cried, which any baby would, they beat him. If he made noise, they hit him harder. They force-fed him, shoving food into his mouth until he choked, punishing him if he spat it out. They'd lock him in rooms. They'd scream at him. They treated him not like a child, but like an object they hated. Stephen Barker, the boyfriend, was particularly vicious. He had a temper, a history of violence, and he took it out on the defenseless little boy. He'd hit Peter with objects. He'd throw him. He'd deliberately hurt him just to see him flinch. Jason Owen, Stephen's brother, joined in. He wasn't just a bystander. He participated. He watched. He laughed. He sometimes inflicted pain himself. And Tracy, his mother, she didn't stop it. She enabled it. She lied for them. She covered for them. She delivered Peter into their hands, day after day. Imagine the terror. Imagine the confusion for a baby. The people who are your entire world, the ones who should give you warmth and food and comfort, are the source of your pain, your cries. Your only way to ask for help only make the pain worse. So what do? Peter learned. He learned the most heartbreaking lesson a child can learn. Silence was safer. He stopped crying out. He withdrew. He became quiet. Too quiet. He'd flinch at sudden movements. He'd avoid eye contact. The sparkle in those bright eyes began to dim, replaced by a dull, watchful fear. The abuse wasn't random outbursts. It was systematic. It was calculated cruelty. They broke his tiny body piece by piece. One of the most horrific injuries happened weeks before he died. They broke his back. They snapped the spine of a 1-year-old child. Can you fathom the pain? The agony of moving, of breathing? Yet, even after this, Peter was taken to the doctor. Even after this, the signs were missed or explained away. The system saw a child covered in injuries and saw only clumsy accidents. They saw a mother giving excuses and saw cooperation. They saw 3 adults in a house and saw a family unit, not a torture chamber. The lies Tracy told became bolder, more grotesque. When social workers visited, she'd smear chocolate on Peter's face. Why? To hide the bruises, to distract the eye. And it worked. Professionals looked at a toddler smeared in chocolate and saw a messy eater, not a child whose wounds were being concealed. She'd blame the injuries on other children, on falls from low furniture, on anything but the truth. Stephen and Jason would stay out of sight, or offer their own chillingly calm versions of events. The House of Horrors presented a carefully constructed, utterly false facade of normality. Peter became isolated. The abuse kept him hidden. He wasn't taken out to playgroups much anymore. Neighbors saw less of him. When people did see him, the changes were shocking, but often dismissed as him being unwell or going through a phase. He lost weight. He looked perpetually tired, haunted. The happy, curly-haired baby was vanishing, replaced by a ghost of a child, bearing the physical and emotional scars of relentless cruelty. And the visits kept happening, doctor after doctor, social worker after social worker. They noted the injuries. They documented the concerns. But they didn't connect them. They didn't look at the whole, horrific picture. They didn't insist on seeing Peter alone, without his abusers present. They didn't demand urgent action. They filed reports. They held meetings. They ticked boxes. They believed the lies whispered by Tracy, enabled by the men hiding in the next room. They saw a vulnerable child, but they failed to see the immediate, deadly danger he was in, every single hour of every single day. This wasn't just neglect anymore. This was active, sadistic torture inflicted by 3 adults on a child who couldn't fight back, couldn't run away, and couldn't make them stop. The descent into darkness wasn't a stumble. It was a plunge, and Peter was drowning in it, while 60 lifelines were thrown carelessly aside, one, by the very people trained to pull him out. The silence wasn't just Peter's survival tactic. It became the echo chamber of his doom. 2 days. That's all that stood between Peter Connolly and the end of his pain. On August 1st, 2007, Tracy Connolly rushed her son to North Middlesex Hospital. Peter was limp, struggling to breathe. His face was swollen. Bruises bloomed across his tiny body like dark flowers. Doctors examined him. They noted the injuries. They took x-rays, but they didn't see the truth. They didn't see the torture. Tracy spun her usual story. Peter had fallen down the stairs. He was clumsy. He'd tumbled off the sofa. The doctors, perhaps overwhelmed, perhaps unwilling to believe a mother could do this, accepted her lies. They treated the visible wounds. They sent him home, back to the house, back to the people who were killing him. Imagine that decision. A child barely able to breathe, covered in bruises, sent back into the arms of his abusers. No urgent follow-up. No child protection alarm bells ringing at full volume. Just discharge papers. A tired mother, a quiet toddler, and a death sentence already written. Now, picture August 3rd, a normal summer morning in London. Sunshine, traffic noise, people heading to work. But inside 27, Penshurst Road in Haringey, something was terribly wrong. Peter wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. He lay too still in his blood-stained cot. Tracy Connolly picked up the phone. She dialed 999. Her voice, recorded on that emergency call, wasn't frantic. It wasn't the raw panic of a mother discovering her child lifeless. It was flat, controlled. She reported her baby wasn't breathing. She said she'd just found him like that. Cold. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They pushed open the door to Peter's room. What they saw stopped them dead. This wasn't just a child who had stopped breathing. This was a child who had been systematically destroyed. Peter's small body lay curled in his cot. His skin was a canvas of horror. Old scars crisscrossed new bruises. Cuts. Scabs. His fingernails were missing. His back was visibly misshapen, bent unnaturally. One paramedic later described it as the worst case of child abuse he'd ever witnessed. And he'd seen too many. They tried to revive him. They worked desperately, their hands moving over his broken body. Knowing deep down it was already too late, Peter was declared dead at the scene. He was 17 months old. His short life ended not in a hospital surrounded by care, but in the same room where he'd endured months of unimaginable suffering, surrounded by the people who inflicted it. But the horrors were only just beginning to surface. When they moved Peter's body, something fell from his lips. A tooth. His baby tooth. Knocked out. But where was the rest of it? The answer came later, during the autopsy. That missing tooth wasn't lost. It was found lodged inside Peter's stomach. How? Forensic pathologists determined it had been punched down his throat with such brutal force that he swallowed it. It was a detail so savage, so deliberately cruel, it defied comprehension. A 1-year-old, punched so hard in the mouth he swallowed his own tooth. The post-mortem examination peeled back the final layers of the nightmare Peter had lived. It revealed a back broken in 2 places, his spine snapped, likely weeks earlier. 8 fractured ribs, some old, some new. His skull was fractured. His scalp was torn. There were deep bruises on his brain. He had bite marks on his body, fingernails ripped out. He was covered in over 50 separate injuries. This wasn't the result of a single tragic accident or a moment of rage. This was the cumulative effect of months of relentless, escalating torture. A tiny body systematically broken, piece by piece. Pathologists made another chilling observation. Many of these injuries, especially the broken back and the multiple rib fractures, would have caused excruciating, constant pain. Peter hadn't just been abused in his final hours. He had been living in agony for weeks, possibly months. Every breath would have hurt. Every movement would have been fire. And through it all, he endured it mostly in silence. The silence he'd learned was his only shield. Tracy, Stephen Barker, and Jason Owen were arrested. They spun stories. They blamed each other. Tracy stuck to her tale of a clumsy child and accidental falls. But the evidence screamed the truth. The blood-stained cot, the injuries no toddler could survive, let alone inflict on himself. The tooth in the stomach, the broken spine, the sheer volume of wounds told a story of sustained, sadistic violence. Think about that final morning. Did Peter wake up in pain, as he did every day? Did he whimper softly, knowing crying would bring more hurt? Did he see one of them approach his cot for the last time? We will never know the exact sequence of events that finally extinguished his life. But we know this: he died utterly alone, surrounded not by love, but by betrayal, in the place that should have been his safest haven. His death certificate recorded the cause, injuries, inflicted by others. A cold, clinical phrase for an act of monstrous cruelty. August 3rd, 2007, wasn't just the day Peter died. It was the day the world finally, horrifyingly, saw what he had been enduring. It was the day the whispers of a clumsy boy were silenced forever by the deafening roar of the truth. It was the day a 17-month-old boy, who had never known safety or kindness, finally found an end to his suffering. But it was also the day the questions began. How? How could this happen? How did 60 visits fail him? How did the hospital send him back? How did he fall through every single crack in the system? Peter's broken body held the evidence of his torture. It also held up a mirror to a society that had looked away, time and time again, until it was far, far too late. His final hours were a testament not just to the evil of 3 individuals, but to the catastrophic failure of everyone sworn to protect him. His silence was finally broken, but only in death. To the neighbors, to the doctors, to the social workers who visited that house, Tracy Connolly, Stephen Barker, and Jason Owen seemed ordinary, unremarkable, just another struggling family on a busy London street. Tracy was a young mother, often appearing overwhelmed but cooperative. She knew how to play the victim, how to sigh and say parenting was hard. Stephen Barker, her boyfriend, kept to himself mostly, a quiet, stocky man. His brother, Jason Owen, who lived with them, seemed almost like a ghost in the background. There was nothing on the surface that screamed monster. But beneath that thin layer of normalcy lived three people capable of unspeakable cruelty. The trial in 2008 didn't just convict them. It ripped away their masks and exposed the chilling reality of who they truly were. Let's start with Tracy Connolly, Peter's mother, 27 years old when Peter died. To authorities, she presented herself as a woman trying her best. She'd talk about the challenges of a young child. She'd express frustration, even tears sometimes. She mastered the art of seeming like a victim of circumstance. But the trial revealed a different Tracy. This wasn't a helpless mother. This was a woman who actively participated in her son's torture. She delivered him into Stephen's hands knowing what would happen. She lied, meticulously and constantly, to every professional who crossed her path. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was complicit. She was the gatekeeper who let the monsters in and locked Peter inside with them. Then there was Stephen Barker, 32 years old, Tracy's boyfriend. On the surface, maybe just a bit rough around the edges, but his history told a darker story. He was a convicted criminal, violence against women, burglary, a history of aggression and control. He wasn't just quiet. He was calculating. He ruled that household with fear. Peter was his primary target. Witnesses described Barker's temper, his enjoyment in inflicting pain. He saw Peter not as a child, but as an object to dominate, to break. He was the architect of much of the physical torture. The trial painted a picture of a man obsessed with power, taking it out on the most vulnerable person in his reach. Jason Owen, Stephen's 37-year-old brother, was perhaps the hardest to understand. He wasn't Peter's parent. He wasn't Tracy's partner. He was just there, living in the house. To outsiders, he seemed passive, almost irrelevant. But passivity in the face of evil is its own form of guilt. The trial showed Jason wasn't just a bystander. He participated. He watched the abuse, sometimes laughed at Peter's suffering, and on multiple occasions, joined in. He didn't have Stephen's rage, but he had his own brand of cruelty, indifference mixed with willing participation. He was Stephen's loyal follower, accepting the brutality as normal. Their carefully constructed facade of a chaotic but ordinary household completely shattered during the trial at the Old Bailey in 2008. Evidence emerged that wasn't just disturbing. It was diabolical. It showed premeditation. It showed enjoyment. It showed a complete lack of humanity. Take the text messages. Messages exchanged between Tracy, Stephen, and Jason. These weren't panicked notes or arguments. They were jokes. Sick jokes about Peter's injuries. They mocked his pain. They referred to his bruises and wounds like they were talking about a damaged toy, not a living, feeling child. One message, presented in court, talked about Peter's injuries in a chillingly casual, even amused way. These texts proved the abuse wasn't just hidden rage bubbling over. It was a shared, callous activity they communicated about openly. Then came the testimony about the deception. Social workers finally admitted what Tracy had done during their visits. When they arrived, Tracy would often smear chocolate or food on Peter's face. Why? To cover the bruises, to distract the eye, to make him look like a messy toddler, not a battered child. And it worked. Professionals looked at the chocolate, not the hidden wounds beneath. It was a deliberate, calculated act of deception performed by his own mother to hide the evidence of the beatings she and the others were giving him. But perhaps the most horrifying glimpse into the depths of their depravity came with the revelation about Stephen Barker's tools. Police searching the house after Peter's death didn't just find a messy home. In Stephen Barker's room, they found what could only be described as a torture kit. Knives, lengths of cable, blood-stained clothing, and a mattress, Peter's mattress, soaked through with the little boy's blood. This wasn't the aftermath of a sudden, uncontrollable outburst. This was evidence of sustained, deliberate violence. The blood wasn't a splash. It was a saturation, telling a silent story of countless beatings inflicted on that small, defenseless body while he lay on that mattress. The knives and cables weren't household items out of place. They were instruments of terror deliberately kept at hand. The trial also heard how they isolated Peter. They kept him away from windows so neighbors couldn't see. They discouraged visits. They presented a united front of lies to anyone who questioned them. Tracy played the stressed but caring mother. Stephen played the uninvolved boyfriend. Jason played the harmless uncle figure. It was a well-rehearsed act designed for one purpose: to keep the torture hidden. Witnesses, including family friends who occasionally visited, described the atmosphere in the house as tense and fearful. They spoke of Peter's visible deterioration, his weight loss, his silence, his flinching, but said they felt intimidated by Stephen Barker, too scared to intervene forcefully. They saw glimpses of the horror, but the trio's combined presence created a wall of intimidation and deceit. Seeing them in the dock, listening to the evidence pile up, the ordinary masks they wore dissolved completely. Tracy wasn't a victim. She was a perpetrator. Stephen wasn't just rough. He was a sadist. Jason wasn't passive. He was an active participant in a shared nightmare. The texts, the chocolate smears, the blood-soaked mattress, the jokes about a baby's pain, these weren't the actions of overwhelmed people. They were the actions of 3 individuals who had chosen cruelty, who had collaborated in the destruction of a child's life. They weren't a dysfunctional family. They were a torture cell, operating in plain sight, hidden only by the terrifyingly ordinary face of evil and a system that desperately wanted to believe the lie. The unmasking was complete. The ordinary neighbors were revealed as the architects of an extraordinary hell for one little boy named Peter. And the question hanging heavy in the courtroom wasn't just why, but how could so many have missed the monsters standing right in front of them? The culprits weren't hidden in shadows. They were hiding in the dull, everyday light of a London council house, wearing the most dangerous disguise of all, normalcy. Peter Connolly didn't just die because 3 people hurt him. He died because dozens of others, trained and paid to protect him, failed to see what was happening, failed to act, failed him. This is the gut-wrenching truth. Peter's murder was enabled, step by step, by a broken system, a system that looked directly at a tortured child and somehow saw only paperwork, excuses, and a box marked safe. Think about that number, over 60 times. 60 times between December 2006 and August 2007. Peter was seen by professionals. Social workers visited the house. Doctors examined him at clinics and hospitals. Health visitors checked his progress. Police were called. 60 separate points of contact. 60 opportunities to lift him out of that hell. And 60 times, the system blinked, looked away, believed the lies. Start with the social workers from Haringey Council. Their job was simple: see the child, really see him, check under his clothes, talk to him alone, observe his behavior. But time after time, they didn't. They'd visit the house, talk mostly to Tracy in the living room. They'd see Peter briefly, maybe with chocolate smeared on his face hiding bruises. They'd note concerns in files, but they didn't insist. They didn't demand to see his body. They didn't push past Tracy's stories. They saw a mother who seemed stressed but cooperative, not a master manipulator hiding torture. They filed reports, held meetings, but they never truly saw Peter. They saw a case number, not a child screaming in silence. Then, the doctors. Peter was taken to hospitals and clinics repeatedly. Broken bones, severe bruising, head injuries. Doctors saw the physical evidence, but they often accepted Tracy's flimsy explanations. He fell downstairs. He's clumsy. He rolled off the sofa. Critical chances were missed. X-rays showed broken ribs, but sometimes these were misread or not properly followed up. On August 1st, just 2 days before he died, Peter was rushed to North Middlesex Hospital, struggling to breathe, covered in bruises. Doctors treated the immediate symptoms and sent him home, back to the torture chamber. They didn't connect the dots. They didn't scream child abuse loud enough. They saw injuries, not a pattern of calculated violence. The police were involved too. Neighbors reported hearing screams. Concerns were raised. Officers visited the house. But investigations were closed quickly, deemed unfounded. They took Tracy's word. They didn't dig deep. They didn't treat Peter like a potential crime victim. They saw nuisance calls, not desperate warnings. Their files were shut before the truth could be forced open. And overseeing it all, Haringey Council Children's Services. This name carries a terrible weight. Just years before Peter, in 2000, another little girl, Victoria Climby, was tortured and murdered in the same borough, under the watch of the same council. A public inquiry tore the system apart. Recommendations were made. Promises were shouted from the rooftops. Never again. Yet, here they were, just a few years later, failing another child in the same horrific way. How? How could the same agency, supposedly reformed, declare Peter Connolly safe? How could they look at a child visited 60 times with escalating injuries and write that he was not at immediate risk? The answers lie in a toxic mix of failures. Bureaucracy. The system was drowning in paperwork. Forms, assessments, case conferences, tick-box exercises. Social workers spent more time writing reports than actually seeing children. Concerns got lost in filing cabinets and email chains. The sheer volume of rules and processes choked action. Protecting the child got buried under protecting the procedure. Understaffing and overwork. Social workers at Haringey were swamped. Caseloads were impossibly high. Workers were inexperienced, poorly supervised, and burning out. They rushed between visits. They didn't have the time, the support, or sometimes the training, to spot the sophisticated lies of manipulative abusers like Tracy Connolly. They were firefighting, and Peter's slow-burning torture didn't look like the biggest blaze. Complacency and blind trust. Perhaps the most poisonous factor. There was a dangerous willingness to believe the adults, to accept the easy explanation, a reluctance to think the unthinkable, that a mother could be part of torturing her own child. Professionals wanted to believe Tracy was trying. They wanted to support the family unit. They didn't want to be accused of overreacting or being unfair. This wasn't malice. It was a terrible, fatal naivety. They trusted the mask Tracy wore. They didn't look hard enough for the monster beneath it. Communication breakdown. Doctors didn't talk properly to social workers. Social workers didn't share urgent concerns effectively with police. Information was siloed. Vital warnings about Peter's injuries, about Tracy's history, about Stephen Barker's violent past didn't get pieced together. No single person held the full, terrifying picture. Each agency saw a fragment of the horror, but no one assembled the whole puzzle until it was too late. The left hand truly didn't know what the right hand was doing, and Peter paid the price. Imagine being Peter. You are seen, physically seen, by professionals again and again. You bear the marks of torture on your skin. You are silent, withdrawn, flinching. You are screaming without making a sound. And every single time, the person who is supposed to rescue you writes a note, closes a file, and walks away, leaving you behind. That's not just neglect. That's a betrayal of the deepest duty society owes to its children. Haringey Council declared Peter Connolly safe. They said the risk was managed. They said the plan was working. On August 3rd, 2007, their declaration was proven catastrophically, horrifically wrong. The system didn't just fail Peter. It actively handed him back to his killers. Time and time again, his death certificate lists his injuries as the cause. But the deeper cause? A system that looked directly at evil. Shrugged and looked away. It saw a child in agony and called it safeguarded. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was an institutional scandal written in a little boy's blood. The guilty verdicts landed like a bomb. On November 11th, 2008, Tracy Connolly, Stephen Barker, and Jason Owen were convicted of causing or allowing Peter Connolly's death. The courtroom was tense, silent for a moment. Then, the dam broke. Not just in the courtroom, but across the entire country. Britain hadn't felt rage like this in years. The name Baby P wasn't just a news story anymore. It was a scream of collective fury. A scream for a little boy failed by absolutely everyone. Imagine the headlines. They weren't tucked away on page 5. They were splashed across every front page, dominating every news bulletin. Britain's shame. How could they let him die? 60 chances missed. Pictures of Peter's innocent face stared out from newspapers and TV screens. A constant, agonizing reminder of what had been lost. People weren't just sad. They were incandescent with anger. They felt betrayed. They felt sick. How could this happen? How could it happen again after Victoria Climby? The public fury wasn't passive. It spilled onto the streets. Outside the Old Bailey courthouse, crowds gathered. Hundreds, then thousands. Ordinary people, parents, grandparents, young people, holding signs, shouting their anger. Justice for Baby P. Sack them all. Their faces were masks of grief and rage. They threw eggs and shouted abuse at the police vans carrying the convicted trio away. They swarmed the offices of Haringey Council, demanding answers, demanding resignations. This wasn't a quiet morning. It was a roar of national shame and demand for change. Peter's face, his story, had ignited something primal. The sentences came next. Life. All 3 received life sentences. Tracy Connolly was told she must serve at least 5 years, though this would later be increased. Stephen Barker, the main torturer, got a minimum of 12 years for Peter's death, plus life for raping a child, a separate, horrific crime discovered during the investigation. Jason Owen got a minimum of 3 years. Many felt the minimum terms were too low, especially for Tracy, but the judge made it clear. Their cruelty and lies had plumbed the depths of human depravity. They would be locked away, their names forever synonymous with evil. But the public's fury wasn't satisfied just seeing the abusers jailed. The target swiftly shifted. People pointed fingers, loud and clear, at Haringey Council and the wider child protection system. The same questions echoed everywhere. How could social workers visit 60 times and see nothing? Why were doctors fooled? Why did the police close investigations? Why, after the scandal of Victoria Climbies's death, had nothing changed enough to save Peter? The system hadn't just failed. It had colluded in Peter's torture through its incompetence and blindness. The demand was simple: hold them accountable. And accountable they were held. The pressure was immense, relentless. Sharon Shoesmith, the director of Children's Services at Haringey Council, became the focal point. She had publicly defended her staff. Insisted procedures were followed. The public and the media tore that defense apart. Within weeks, she was sacked, removed from her post. Others followed. Social workers directly involved in Peter's case lost their jobs. Managers were suspended. The message was brutal. Failure on this scale had consequences. Jobs were lost. The government scrambled to respond. Prime Minister Gordon Brown called Peter's death a terrible tragedy and promised action. Inquiries were launched immediately. Not just one, but several. Serious case reviews dissected every single failure, every missed chance, every piece of miscommunication. Lord Laming, who had led the inquiry into Victoria Climbies's death, was called back. His new report was scathing. It didn't just find individual errors. It found systemic collapse across health, police, and social services in Haringey. The same failures, happening again. This wasn't just about blame. It was about forcing change. Real, concrete, urgent change. Peter's death became the catalyst for a seismic shift in how Britain protected its most vulnerable children. New rules weren't just suggested. They were written into law, etched in the lessons of Peter's suffering. They became known as the Baby P reforms. What did they demand? See the child alone. No more just talking to parents in the living room. Social workers must see the child by themselves. Speak to them alone, age permitting. Check their bodies properly. No chocolate smears hiding bruises. No parental excuses drowning out a child's silent plea. Challenge the parents. No more accepting flimsy stories at face value. If a toddler has broken ribs, he fell isn't good enough. Ask hard questions. Demand evidence. Be skeptical. Assume nothing. Share information. The deadly silos between doctors, police, and social workers had to be smashed. New laws and systems forced them to talk to each other. Share concerns instantly. Build a complete picture of risk. A child's safety trumped data protection concerns. Act faster. Bureaucratic delays in getting children into protection were slashed. New timelines forced swift decisions. If a child was at risk, the system had to move, not meander through paperwork. Better training. Frontline staff received intensive new training on spotting disguised compliance, like Tracy's Act, recognizing signs of torture, and understanding manipulative abusers. Peter's case wasn't just another tragic headline. It forced a reckoning. It held a mirror up to Britain's child protection services and screamed that the reflection was unacceptable. It shattered complacency. It made never again more than just empty words. His death triggered the biggest overhaul of child safeguarding in England in a generation. Councils across the country reviewed their practices. Funding was shifted. Priorities changed. The reforms weren't perfect. The system remains under pressure. But Peter's legacy meant that the rules of the game changed fundamentally. His name became synonymous not just with failure, but with the fierce, hard-won demand to do better. The outrage didn't fade. It built something. It built a wall, however imperfect, between vulnerable children and the kind of suffering Peter endured. His short, tragic life became the reason countless other children might be seen, heard, and saved. 17 years have passed since Peter Connolly died. The headlines faded. The protests quieted. Tracy, Stephen, and Jason remain locked away. But Peter's presence hasn't vanished. It echoes, quietly, powerfully, every single day. Step into a social work training session anywhere in England today. Look at the manuals. Peter's case, often referred to as Baby P to protect identities, though we know his name, is there. Not buried, but central. His photos, his story, his suffering are studied not just as history, but as a brutal, essential lesson. His face looks back at new social workers. A silent question: will you see what others missed? Peter's death forced change. Real, tangible, life-saving change. It ripped open the complacency that had festered after Victoria Climbies's murder. It proved the system was still broken, still blind, but unlike before. The outcry was too loud, the failure too glaring, to ignore. The result? Sweeping reforms, etched with Peter's name. The most significant is often called the Baby P Law. It tore down the bureaucratic walls that had trapped children like Peter in dangerous homes. Before, removing a child into care was a slow, tangled process, bogged down by court delays and endless assessments. After Peter, the rules changed dramatically. If a child is deemed at serious risk right now, social services can act fast. Emergency protection orders are prioritized. Court hearings are accelerated. The focus shifted from endless working with the family to a laser focus on the child's immediate safety. Red tape was cut because Peter showed the cost of delay was measured in a child's life. Countless children since have been whisked to safety faster because of this law. Children who might otherwise have suffered Peter's fate. But the changes go far beyond one law. Training was revolutionized. Social workers don't just learn theory anymore. They learn Peter's story. They learn to spot disguised compliance, the act Tracy perfected, smiling while smearing chocolate to hide bruises. They're drilled to always see the child alone, to always check under clothes, to never accept weak excuses for serious injuries. Could this be non-accidental? Is the first question now, not the last. Doctors and police receive similar training. Peter's injuries, the broken back, the swallowed tooth, the bite marks are shown not to shock, but to teach, to sear the signs of torture into memory, to ensure professionals see what was once overlooked. Communication was forced. The deadly silos between doctors, police, and social workers were smashed. New systems ensure vital information, a violent partner moving in, a suspicious injury, a missed appointment, is shared instantly. A child's safety now trumps data privacy concerns or interdepartmental rivalry. Peter's case proved that fragmented knowledge is lethal. Now, the pieces must be put together. The whole picture must be seen. Accountability became personal. Serious case reviews after a child's death or serious harm became tougher, more transparent. Managers face scrutiny. The culture of defensive we followed procedure is challenged. Peter's legacy demands, did you truly see the child? Did you challenge the parents? Did you act? Jobs and reputations rest on getting this right. Complacency is no longer an acceptable excuse. This is Peter's concrete legacy, systems rebuilt, practices hardened, children saved. His name in a training manual isn't just a footnote. It's a shield for the next vulnerable child. The Baby P reforms are his unwitting gift to children he would never meet. But Peter's legacy runs deeper than laws and manuals. It asks a haunting question that lingers in the air, in courtrooms, in case conferences, in our own hearts. How many people saw Peter's pain and did nothing? Not just the professionals, though their 60 missed chances are staggering. What about the neighbors who heard screams but dismissed them as family rows? The family friend who saw Peter flinch and lose weight, but felt it wasn't their place to interfere? The passers-by who noticed a withdrawn, bruised toddler but looked away? Peter's story isn't just about the evil of 3 individuals or the failure of a system. It's about the silence of the crowd. It's about the uncomfortable truth that protecting children isn't only the job of social workers or police. It's everyone's responsibility. Children trapped in hidden hells can't protect themselves. They can't dial 999. They can't walk out the door. They rely utterly on the adults around them to see and to speak. Peter's life was short and filled with unimaginable pain. His death was horrific, but his legacy forces a fundamental shift. It forces us to understand that cruelty thrives in silence and inaction. It forces us to reject the easy thought, it's not my business. It forces us to ask, what if it was my child? What if it was the child next door? His legacy is a constant, uncomfortable reminder. We are the eyes and ears for children who have no voice. If we see a child who seems constantly withdrawn, covered in unexplained bruises or burns, flinching from touch, terrified of a parent or carer, or simply fading away, we must speak up. Call social services. Call the police. Tell a teacher. Don't assume someone else will. Don't worry about being wrong. It is always better to be wrong about suspecting abuse than to be silent while a child suffers. Peter's silence was survival, until it became his death sentence. Our silence is complicity. Peter Connolly should be a young man today. He isn't, but because of him, other children get to grow up. Other children are seen faster, heard clearer, rescued sooner. His legacy is not just in changed laws, but in a changed awareness. He taught a nation a brutal lesson, that protecting children isn't passive. It demands our eyes wide open, our voices loud, and our courage strong. He taught us that never again starts not with a system, but with every single one of us refusing to look away. That is the enduring echo of Peter Connolly. That is the legacy written in his memory. See something. Say something. It might just save a life. Peter Connolly would be 18 this year. He might have been finishing school, falling in love, chasing dreams. Instead, we remember him as Baby P, a symbol of innocence betrayed. His death wasn't just a crime. It was a collective failure. So today, let his memory be a call. See the unseen. Hear the silent. Because sometimes, saving a life starts with refusing to look away.